Been too long since we've caught up with our guy from Fifth Down College Football, Mark Schipper. Welcome back, friend. How are you?
Yeah, what's up, guys? I'm doing great. Glad to be back on with you. How you guys doing?
Man, listen, we're always glad to be joined by you. Mark, obviously college football continues to change and change drastically to the point where a lot of us don't recognize it. I've asked a couple of people recently this question. I'll pose the same one to you. With the constant changes we've had over the last year, and again, those changes continue. Big picture, as we head into the 2024 college football season, do you think college football is in a good spot?
I don't think it's time to say whether it is or isn't. It's mid-revolution. This is kind of what I've been talking about for the last few years, and kind of what the Fifth Down project was about, was the coming revolution in college football, and it's here. We're in full swing. We're kind of in the middle of it, so some things are looking good. Others are major departures from the past, and I think we need to see where more of this shakes out in terms of revenue sharing and NIL, and if it's going to be returned to what NIL was meant to be, and conference realignment, the playoff, et cetera. There's so much right now that's uncertain. The future of the NCAA itself is very tenuous at this point. So I can't say whether it's in a good or bad spot. I can say it's changing rapidly.
Well, how much do you think that the four-letter network, and I think everybody knows who that is, has contributed to the current state of college athletics, specifically college football?
Yeah, they're neck deep in it. They're neck deep, from the contracts they pay to the conferences to broadcast their games, to their control of the postseason, to college game day, and their powerful personalities who feel the need to weigh in partisan fashion, which we know influences people because we have a sport that picks participants as opposed to having a hard system in which, division titles or league titles mean certain seeds or certain places in the postseason. We've got a sport that's still shaped by opinion. So ESPN's neck deep in all of it. But I'll say this, if it wasn't ESPN, it would be someone else.
Yep.
Because television networks have been into college football broadcasting in deadly serious fashion since the 1960s. And since the 1960s, they've been pushing college football for a playoff. They want to do what the NFL has done. And they've been after that goal for what we're going on, 60 years now. So they're finally getting to that point. So if it wasn't ESPN, it would be someone else. But ESPN is, they happen to be in the middle of everything.
Mark, obviously we're heading towards the 12-team playoff in 2024. We've seemingly settled on the 5+7 model. So I'll ask you, in terms of the SEC and the Big Ten, first year of the 12-team playoff, over or under 6.5 teams for those two conferences in year one?
Year one, over, probably over. Probably over. That's really hard to say because I haven't gotten into my previews yet. I haven't looked hard at it. Man, that's a good number, actually, now that I'm thinking about it. You get good action on both sides of that. Let me flip-flop. And say under.
That does feel like a good number, though,
Yep.
DC. I like it. 6.5 feels like they're betting line.
Yeah.
Mark Schipper, Fifth Down College Football, our guest. Mark, Paul Feinbaum said recently, and of course you're familiar, you've been on his show a few times, said the G5 will be nothing more than a sacrificial lamb in the playoffs. But in college basketball, the little guy doesn't have to win it to have a great run. Just getting to the Sweet 16 for most is a huge, huge deal. What should realistic expectations for success be for a G5 team in this new playoff?
Yeah, that's why Paul's a brilliant broadcaster right there, isn't he? He's got a way of making statements that get people talking. A sacrificial lamb, they're going to have trouble winning games, but I do think there will be upsets. So here's the way I'm kind of looking at it is it's the context has changed a little bit because when you have a postseason tournament, of course, the point is to win the championship. Mm-hmm. So getting beat in any round of the bracket feels like you failed in your season. But I think a better way to look at it, especially for some teams who aren't going to be there that frequently, is to look at these like big bowl games. And so if you win that first-round game, you pull a big upset, you won a big bowl game. That could be the biggest win maybe in program history. Mm-hmm. So I think, pulling an upset in an early round, playing well in the next round, and again, like any other bracket, it's going to depend on matchups. It's going to depend on injuries. So, I think making the playoffs is a big deal. Obviously, if you win a game, it would be like winning a New Year's Day bowl against a major program. So I think they should maybe recontextualize into sort of a bowl scenario where we didn't win the national title, but we won like the equivalent of a Sugar Bowl type of thing.
Mark Schipper, Fifth Down College Football, our guest. Mark, what ultimately happens to now that we've got two teams left of the Pac-12, Washington State and Oregon State, what eventually happens with those two teams?
Yeah, great question. Great question. I don't know. What I think could happen is I could see this revolution continue to spin out, and we get a top division of 40, 50, 60 major programs, and Wazoo and Oregon State would make the cut in that scenario, and they'd be re-included in sort of a re-bracketed national division setup, something like that. I could see it going that direction. If we continue with the sort of Big Ten, SEC hegemony, and they're very strict on who they're going to let join them, those schools will probably end up joining a smaller conference permanently, maybe a revamped Western Conference or something else, and they'll be cut out of the big show. They'll make less revenue. They'll have to deal with all the things that the G5 and the small power programs deal with, which, for them and their fans would be a pretty brutal blow considering they've been part of the big game for more than 100 years.
Mark, I mentioned earlier the 5+7 model in terms of the college football playoff. Notre Dame, they're obviously not going to get an automatic bid to that college football playoff. But is this model a good thing for Notre Dame going forward?
Good thing. It could be. A lot of people talked about Notre Dame not getting that auto bid and not having a conference to win, but the one thing you have to keep in mind with Notre Dame is they also don't have to win a conference championship game. So they're playing one less high-stakes game at the end of the season, and they'll make that game up in the playoffs. So it kind of ends up evening out, which is why I think Notre Dame agreed to this. They still have access, and in the end, the games will even out. So I'm going to have to see how it plays out to decide whether or not it's good for Notre Dame. I think Notre Dame, if this whole college football landscape keeps shifting in the direction it's shifting, I think Notre Dame will join a league. I think everyone will be forced to join a league, and they're not going to have one independent floating out there who gets all the kind of special considerations. That was a great thing for Notre Dame for a long time, but the game may just be changing to the point where it's time for them to join a league.
I know you tweeted out recently about the College Football Hall of Fame, which I've had a chance to see over in Atlanta, and I think it is a must for all college football fans. It got me thinking, you're a historian of college football. Who do you think the most underrated coach in recent memory has been?
Yeah, recent memory. A guy who always jumps to mind who doesn't get talked about is Mike Bellotti, who coached Oregon for
very good name.
18 seasons. Rich Brooks was the coach right before Mike Bellotti at Oregon, and he spent 20 years building up what was a perennial loser into a quality football program. Of course, he topped it out with the 94 Pac-10 championship and Rose Bowl. Mike Bellotti took over that program, and there was every reason for Oregon to slip back into the pack. Now, Phil Knight got involved, and Nike got involved, and that, of course, helped. But it was Mike Bellotti who built that program into the state it was in when Chip Kelly took over and went on the big run with it. So we've seen what kind of coach and recruiter Chip is. Those are Mike Bellotti's guys that Chip won with. Chip's a great offensive mind, but Mike Bellotti, to me, is a high-end coach who doesn't get talked about enough because it was kind of just before Oregon went supersonic.
That's a great name. Mark, it's always fun. I'd say it's fun catching up in the offseason, but as we've learned, there really is no offseason anymore, so we need to do this again very soon. In the meantime, tell our listeners how they can follow you online.
Yeah, anytime, guys. I appreciate it. Yeah, you want to find Fifth Down? I think X, Twitter is probably the best spot, at Fifth Down CFB, like college football, and come say hi over there, and a great place to connect.
Thank you, bud. Appreciate it.
Bye, guys. Take care.